Philip.
I guess my career, people say, people are interested for whatever reason, how you fell into it. And I grew up in New Zealand. My mum was always, was not very well. And, I'd sort of seen her stay in bed for 6 months and then, jump out and get in one of Dad's cars. He had a motor garage, drive to Christchurch and put $4,000 on a credit card. Like in today's money, that'd be like putting $20,000, And I just sort of thought, oh, that was it. Mum was sick. I didn't think too much about it, but I started to cook because she couldn't. I did actually go to Christchurch to sit an exam to be an aircraft mechanic for Air New Zealand. Most chefs had rubbish maths and I sort of failed that. And Mum just sort of, after that, walked me into town. This is the 70s and said, he went into a place called the Clarendon. It was sort of quite a well-known restaurant in Christchurch, hotel. And they just said, start tomorrow. And the next day I cut my finger off on the slicer and I've been kind of cooking ever since, really. But when I came to Australia, it was a sort of a fairly, New Zealand thing to do. Australians do it too, go overseas. And I had I liked my job and I didn't think of doing anything else, but it wasn't really a passion. It was just, I ended up as the second chef, sous chef at the Crest Hotel, which is now the Pullman Hotel. And a friend of mine, Jim, and his friend, they'd gone to England. He rang up and said, you've got to get over here. We're kidding ourselves, trying to learn. That's what I did. And I can remember going to this restaurant. It was owned by Anthony Worrell Thompson. It was the real rage at the time. Lady Di used to eat there. It was called Menage a Trois. The first day I went and the steps of this restaurant before the chef arrived with the key, the food started to turn up. There was like 15 different lettuces, 20 different mushrooms, 20 different, unpasteurized cheeses. And I just was looking at it going, wow, I'll be flat out putting a name to this, let alone working with it. But, and to put it in perspective, at the time in Australia, we had a button mushroom and a field mushroom. So that's when it changed for me. I was about to go back to England and someone said, have you seen Rob Riddell's bought that building on the corner of Boundary and Adelaide Street, which is this beautiful old heritage building, which was Echo. And I went and spoke to him. And he said, if you come back within 6 months, we can do the restaurant. And so that was the start of Echo. Right place, right time, I guess.
It was the first of its kind in Brisbane.
Thank you.
It was.
Yes, he was iconic.
Iconic, yeah.
So, a question for you, Philip. Philip, for almost 30 years, you've carried a kitchen, a team, and the city on your shoulders. You built a restaurant that has helped define Brisbane, and you keep it alive through every storm this industry can throw at a chef. After all the pressure, all the sacrifice, all the years when you were holding everything up, what was the moment when you realised that your journey had truly cost you and what it had actually given you?
That's a good question.
One person changed the way I thought about food, and that's a big thing. When I'd been 2 years at Echo, I picked up the River Cafe Blue Book and I looked at it and I showed it to PJ, my chef, who's now the owner of Harvey's in James Street, and I just said, man, have a look at this. And it was just like, what you see is what you get. It was unconstructed. It was like, if it was grey, it was grey. If it was, if it was red, it was red. There was no airs or graces. So there was Rose Gray, who's sort of who I consider a mentor to me, and Ruth Rogers. These women were in their 50s when they started this sort of staff canteen for the architectural firm, and all these friends of Sir Richard Rogers, who did the Lloyd's building and everything in London, they said, can we come to the canteen? And they said, I guess. And anyway, it went all the way to 1 Michelin star. So what happened was I looked at this book and I went, wow. I got on an airplane and I flew to London and did what they call is a stage, which was very common in the 80s and 90s. It means, the French would call it being on stage to see what's going on. When I got there, the two people who were rank and file, just doing a chef's job, chef to parties, was Jamie Oliver, yet to be discovered, and Ben O'Donoghue, another Australian chef. So anyway, I just sort of was just looking at this stuff. It was just thinking, this is amazing. And I came back and we'd sort of started to do our first book. What they used to do for the Gourmet Traveller Award, it used to be done through voting. So people would buy the Gourmet Traveller magazine, they'd pull out a coupon and vote for a restaurant. It was throwing up all these restaurants that weren't really relevant. But Gourmet didn't really want to stop that because it was selling an awful lot of magazines. So we were the first year where they had 2 restaurants. One was a Critic's Choice, which was what Echo got in at, and one was some other restaurant. And then anyway, so we're moving on to the end of '97, and we got this invitation to go to the awards in Sydney. It was in some place in the park, and I sort of thought, you know, I don't know, we're not going to win this. Like the Queensland, no one's going to win this, you know, because the people in that award that year was Rockpool, Tetsua, like, you know, it was bloody Echo. No one knew who it was. So Rick Stein had gone to every 2 restaurants in every state. He was doing the talk during the thing, and I was still thinking, there's no way you're going to win against these heavyweights from Melbourne and Sydney. So I'm sitting there, and he talked about each restaurant he'd been to, and he didn't mention Echo, and I thought, that's kind of weird. Like, I thought, that I don't think I'm going to win this, but, you know, you think it'd be worth a mention. And then he said, I went to this restaurant, and it was all about, you know, the package. The waiter came up and he talked about this Madfish Bay in Western Australia where the fish come in on the low tide and they get caught in the rocks and they go mad. That's why it's called Madfish Bay. And I thought, well, half the world's got that on. And then he said, then we had some calf's liver with a bit of mash and some bacon. I thought, well, yep, pretty generic. And then he said, and then we had this Moreton Bay bug risotto, which I'd learned from Rose, really. And I thought, my God, that's me.
I remember that dish.
And then all the press, some little known restaurant has won Gourmet Traveller Restaurant of the Year. And they said the only people that were more shocked in the audience or something was Philip Johnson himself, who looked like a stunned mullet.
I love that film.